Welcome to The Debate. Today, we're confronting a culinary controversy that really forces us to question the very basis of classification. Is a hot dog a sandwich? This debate, it might seem trivial, but it actually lies at the heart of how we apply rules of structure, law, and culture to, define the world around us.
It is a question of taxonomy, certainly, but it's also a challenge to language itself. When does a category become so broad that it ceases to be useful? We're examining whether the hot dog really deserves its own independent identity, or if it must be sort of subsumed into the larger sandwich family.
Precisely. So the central question is, resolved. Is a hot dog a sandwich? I'll be arguing affirmatively. The hot dog fundamentally meets the necessary criteria of its genus, and I think any attempts to exclude it are based on, pretty arbitrary structural constraints.
And I'll be taking the opposing stance. I argue negatively. The hot dog possesses a distinct structure, history, and cultural resonance that absolutely establishes it as a unique, self-contained food category. It is not, and frankly has never truly been, a sandwich.
Okay, so my position begins with the simplest metric, definition. When we look at the basic requirements of a sandwich, what is it, a food consisting of bread with filling between? The hot dog pretty clearly delivers. The bun is bread, right? And the sausage is the filling. But the argument goes much deeper than just that simple fulfillment. We really have to maintain logical consistency across all these bread and filling constructs. The source material highlights how we already accept structural equivalents that, undermine that strict two separate slices rule. Think of subs, hoagies, or maybe most persuasively, the main-style lobster roll, which uses a top-split roll that's a single piece of bread cut open.
Okay.
These are like universally accepted as sandwiches. So if we admit those, then the hot dog, which uses a functionally identical method of single roll splitting, it just must logically be included. To deny the hot dog status seems like arbitrary gatekeeping against a structurally analogous form.
That's a compelling point about consistency. I'll grant you that. But consistency, I think, must sometimes yield to common usage and structural essence. I come at it from a slightly different angle. The structural integrity of the bun itself is the key differentiator. Let's say true sandwich relies on two distinct planes of bread, whether that's two slices or a bun sliced entirely through, that fully enclose the filling. They provide lateral support and allow the filling to be stacked up. The hot dog bun, though, it's a single connected piece of bread. It merely cradles the sausage. It's really a specialized vessel purpose-built for that sausage. Furthermore, the cultural consensus is, overwhelmingly clear. If you ask the average person if they just had a sandwich after eating a hot dog, the immediate, intuitive answer is almost always no.
Right.
Language and categories are ultimately defined by, shared cultural agreement, not just rigid dictionary entries. And the hot dog has achieved, I'd argue, sufficient critical mass in our culture to stand alone, much like a taco or, say, a burrito. It's its own thing.
Okay, let's delve into that structural distinction for a moment, because I believe your line drawing there is fundamentally inconsistent. You insist that the bun's connected nature, that hinge, disqualifies it. But is the hinge really the issue? I think the function is key here. The split bun functions, effectively as two pieces of bread providing containment. The source material presents the submarine sandwich as maybe the strongest counter-argument to your point. A 6-inch subloaf is, it's rarely severed entirely. It often has a hinge. Yet, everyone agrees, it remains a sandwich. So why is the sub's hinge acceptable, but the hot dog bun's hinge, which accomplishes the exact same goal of containment, why is that the absolute breaking point? If we are serious about structural classification, shouldn't we address the purpose of the enclosure?
That's a sharp challenge regarding the sub, yes. But have you considered the structural geometry and maybe the intent of consumption? The sub is typically sliced horizontally, right, along its major axis. And the filling is placed laterally between the two halves. It's designed to lay flat, essentially. and supports ingredients piled on top of each other. The sub retains the enclosure feature that's critical to the sandwich tradition, allowing for stacked contents. The hot dog, however, is different. It's designed as a vertical delivery system. The bun's connected nature and that specific U-shape are designed to cradle a singular sausage, primarily to prevent it from rolling away. It's a custom-built receptacle, more like a sheath, not really an enclosure in the same way. To just ignore this difference is, I think, to disregard the evolution of food forms.
I concede that the consumption style differs, okay, but that sounds like a functional difference, not necessarily a categorical one. If the line is truly drawn at structural purity, two fully separated pieces, then we lose half the items that are undeniably sandwiches. Think about pita pockets, wraps, and yes, those hinged subs we just talked about. If we accept those clear examples, then the hot dog, which is simply a specialized longitudinal bread sheath, well, it seems like it has to be part of the family.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the definition should be stretched quite so far. If we make the structural definition include the hot dog simply based on the presence of bread and filling, where does this semantic elasticity stop? We really do introduce what philosophers call the slippery slope. If we allow any connected bread that cradles filling, then the term sandwich starts to lose all useful meaning. The whole goal of taxonomy is clarity, right? If a hot dog is a sandwich, then, well, is an open-faced sandwich half a sandwich? Is a quesadilla just a flat, circular sandwich? If our definition ends up encompassing everything, it really explains nothing. We must maintain some line, I think, drawn at the requirement of lateral enclosure between two effectively separate planes of bread, just to preserve the word's utility.
Okay, I agree we need sensible boundaries, absolutely. But my boundary is more functional, savory food enclosed by a recognizable bread product, primarily for portability. But let's maybe move beyond structure for a second and discuss the matter of authority, because this is where the utilitarian argument for inclusion, I think, gains some serious traction. Our source material demonstrates that authoritative bodies do see a functional and economic equivalence. Specifically, certain state tax codes legally classify hot dogs as sandwiches. Now, this isn't some accidental classification. It's a conscious regulatory decision, usually to ensure consistency in taxing prepared foods sold for immediate consumption. When the government, a body often concerned with objective functional categorization, groups hot dogs with deli sandwiches for economic purposes, well, that seems like powerful evidence for its inclusion in the broader category.
That's a compelling point about the tax codes. I see that. But have you considered the conflicting nature of authority here? Because while tax codes deal with revenue and retail consistency, other expert bodies, ones concerned specifically with food definitions, they vehemently disagree. The USDA, for instance, which is, responsible for standardizing food classification for trade and production, explicitly maintains a distinction. And perhaps even more relevant, the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council, which is essentially the voice of the industry and culture surrounding the hot dog, has publicly stated quite clearly that a hot dog is not a sandwich. So, who holds greater authority over the identity of the food? Is it a tax collector focused on the point of sale, or the regulatory body and the industry that define its very existence? I would argue it's the latter.
I respect the authority of the industry council, of course, but one could argue they have a vested interest in maintaining the distinct cultural identity of their product, right? For marketing, perhaps? And the USDA's classifications, while rigorous, often seem focused more on the ingredients like meat content, preparation standards, not necessarily the final assembly with the bread. The tax code, arguably, looks at the finished product in the context of how the consumer purchases and uses it, which is in many ways how we define categories in daily life.
But let's look at the critical factor of consumer intent versus outcome. When a consumer intends to purchase or eat a sandwich, what are they usually craving? It's often, cold cuts, maybe something grilled like a panini, structured laterally, allowing for multiple stacked toppings. Lived experience suggests that when a person craves a traditional deli sandwich, they do not generally mean a hot dog. The intention and the derived satisfaction from the two foods are culturally and, I'd say, phenomenologically distinct. The hot dog serves a specific, almost ritualistic need sometimes.
Okay, but that seems to rely quite heavily on anecdotal craving, doesn't it? I want to shift the focus slightly back to that point of cultural identity, but from a different angle. Why the intense need for absolute categorical purity here? I might suggest that excluding the hot dog is merely a form of maybe culinary conservatism, resisting the evolution of the category. The sandwich category is historically a broad, accommodating family, and the hot dog could simply be seen as a specialized cousin, a modern evolution of that foundational bread plus filling concept popularized, supposedly, by the Earl of Sandwich.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy the necessity of inclusion for inclusivity's sake. We should argue not for forced inclusion, but for the preservation of distinct cultural symbols. The hot dog is proudly its own category, and maintaining that distinction is essential for categorical clarity. Forcing it into the sandwich classification, simply for the sake of, well, making the category bigger, it actually erases its unique distinctiveness and its considerable symbolic value. Think about the ritual. The hot dog is often a food of place. The ballpark, the street cart, the 4th of July barbecue. Its condiments are typically applied in lines down the vertical axis of that cradle structure. Contrast this with the sandwich, often a utilitarian lunch item designed for lateral packing and transport, maybe cut in half with condiments spread across an interior surface. These differences in serving geometry, preparation ritual, and cultural association, I believe, grant the hot dog its independence.
But these differences, while I agree they're real, describe more of a specialized serving style, not an entirely separate food group, wouldn't you say? I mean, the sub sandwich is equally tied to specific rituals, the deli counter, the specific way they stack the meats and veggies. Yet we recognize the sub as a sandwich, despite its clear differences from, say, a standard 2-slice club sandwich. My position remains that the denial of the hot dog's identity relies too heavily on somewhat arbitrary structural constraints that hinge again, and maybe a refusal to acknowledge its legitimate place in the modern bread and filling tradition.
And my position holds firm that the distinction is maintained by both structural integrity and overwhelming common usage. That connected bun that cradles the filling is, I maintain, fundamentally, ontologically different from an enclosed filling secured between two separate planes. Upholding the distinctness of the hot dog preserves the clarity and the very meaning of the sandwich category, keeping the word sandwich meaningful and useful in culinary taxonomy.
To summarize my view, the definition of sandwich must be broad enough, flexible enough to accommodate evolving forms, especially when clear precedent exists in items like subs and hoagies that utilize a single split roll. The functional equivalence recognized even by legal authorities in some cases, combined with the fact that the basic structural requirements are met by the split bun, I think solidifies the hot dog's claim as a member of the sandwich family.
And to summarize mine, the weight of cultural consensus, the authority of defining bodies like the USDA, and importantly, the National Hot Dog Council, coupled with the hot dog's unique vertical serving geometry and purpose-built structure, confirm its independence. It has, quite simply, earned its own category.
Well, this debate over the hot dog's classification certainly highlights the complex nature of taxonomy, doesn't it? It proves that even everyday items require careful application of, well, philosophical concepts like structural analysis, legal authority, and cultural relevance.
Absolutely. And it demonstrates that whether you appeal to history, law, or structural essence, defining the world around us is rarely as simple as just looking up a dictionary entry. There remains, clearly, much more to explore in how we categorize the culinary world and, perhaps, the world at large.